Welcome back to Educational Bedtime, where history comes alive in the most soothing way possible. If you enjoy these deep dives into the past, consider subscribing to join our community of curious minds who find peace in learning about the world that came before us. Tonight, we're stepping into a world where medicine and mystery intertwined, where healing and harming walked hand in hand, and where the line between doctor and executioner was often impossibly thin. We're going to explore what it was really like to be a medieval doctor, not the romanticized version you might imagine, but the raw, desperate reality of trying to heal in an age when understanding the human body was considered heresy and where your best intentions could easily become your patient's death sentence. Imagine yourself transported back 700 years to a time when a simple cut could mean death, when the sight of blood was considered the cure for almost everything, and when the most educated healers in society were armed with little more than superstition, prayer, and an unwavering belief in methods that would horrify us today. Over the next 2 hours, we'll walk through 4 distinct worlds within medieval medicine. We'll experience the daily horror of being a barber-surgeon, follow a plague doctor through the darkest pandemic in human history, uncover the mysterious herbal wisdom of medieval monasteries, and finally step into the golden chambers where royal physicians play deadly games with the lives of kings and queens. So, settle in, let your mind wander back through the centuries, and prepare to discover why being a medieval doctor was perhaps one of the most challenging, terrifying, and ultimately tragic professions in human history. Chapter 1: The Daily Horror of Being a Medieval Barber-Surgeon. The first pale light of dawn creeps through the narrow window of your cramped workshop, casting long shadows across the blood-stained wooden table that serves as your operating surface. You're a barber-surgeon in 14th century London, and as you wake on this particular morning, the metallic scent of dried blood mingles with the acrid smell of yesterday's cauterizing irons. This is your world, a place where the art of healing and the craft of cutting hair exist in an unsettling harmony. Your workshop sits above a narrow street, the upper floor of a building that houses your barbershop below. The floorboards creak under your weight as you rise, and you can already hear the stirring of the city beyond your walls. London is waking up, and with it comes the inevitable parade of the sick, the wounded, and the desperate, all seeking your services, with a faith that you yourself have long since lost. The tools of your trade await you, arranged on a rough wooden shelf that runs along one wall. Your knives, some inherited from your master, others forged by the local blacksmith, bear the stains of countless procedures. The metal has never been truly clean, not in the way we understand cleanliness today. You wipe them with a cloth, perhaps rinse them in a basin of water that has already been used for washing, and consider them ready for the day's work. Your primary instruments include a set of lancets, small sharp blades specifically designed for bloodletting. These delicate knives, forged from iron and occasionally steel when you can afford it, must be kept razor sharp to make clean cuts in veins and arteries. The handles are worn smooth from years of use, their bone or wood construction stained dark with the accumulated blood of hundreds of patients. Beside them rest your fleams, multi-bladed instruments that look almost like small combs, each blade designed for different types of cuts, depending on the thickness of the patient's skin and the depth of the vein you seek to open. Beside them, your bone saws rest like sleeping serpents, crude instruments that you will use to amputate limbs when infection has taken hold beyond any hope of healing. These saws, with their serrated edges and sturdy wooden handles, are adapted from the tools used by carpenters and butchers. The irony is not lost on you that the same tools used to cut timber and meat are employed to cut through human bone and flesh. The blades are kept sharp through constant honing, but they lack the precision of modern surgical instruments, requiring considerable force and causing tremendous trauma to the patient. Your cupping horns sit in a row, their hollow chambers designed to draw blood from the surface of the skin, made from actual animal horns, carved and shaped by hand. They carry the lingering scent of the creatures they once belonged to. These instruments, when heated over your small brazier and applied to the skin, create a vacuum that draws blood to the surface. The technique requires careful timing. Too little heat and the suction is weak. Too much and you risk burning your patient's flesh. Your collection of forceps, ranging from delicate instruments for extracting splinters to heavy ones capable of gripping and pulling teeth, represents some of your most sophisticated tools. These are fashioned after the designs that have been passed down since Roman times, their basic principles unchanged for over 1,000 years. The smaller forceps, with their precise grips and careful balance, are used for removing foreign objects from wounds, the larger ones for the brutal work of tooth extraction, and when necessary, the removal of infected tissue. The morning brings your first patient, a merchant's wife whose husband leads her up the narrow stairs to your workshop. She suffers from what we might recognize today as a severe migraine, but in your world, the cause is clear, an excess of blood that has risen to her head, creating pressure that must be relieved. You guide her to your table, noting how her hands shake with pain and fear, observing the pallor of her skin and the way she holds her head as if any movement might cause it to shatter. The process of bloodletting begins with the selection of the appropriate vein. You run your fingers along her arm, feeling for the pulse that will guide your blade, searching for the median basilic vein that runs along the inner surface of the arm. This vein, according to the medical text you have studied, is connected directly to the head, and is therefore ideal for relieving the excess blood that is causing her suffering. Your knowledge of anatomy is limited, based on centuries-old texts that describe the human body in ways that bear little resemblance to reality, but it is the best knowledge available to you. The knife you choose is sharp enough, honed on the leather strop that hangs beside your window, but it carries the residue of every previous patient who has lain on this table. You make your cut with practiced confidence, watching as the dark red blood flows into the pewter bowl you have positioned beneath her arm. The incision, made with a swift downward motion, opens the vein cleanly, and you can see the immediate relief in the woman's eyes as she believes the pressure in her head will now begin to subside. The blood comes slowly at first, then in a steady stream that fills your bowl with its dark, life-giving liquid. You watch its color, its consistency, looking for signs that you have been taught to recognize. Too dark, and it suggests an excess of melancholy, one of the four humors that medieval medicine believes govern human health. Too bright, and it indicates too much yellow bile. The woman's blood appears properly balanced in color, which suggests that the treatment is working as intended. The woman's husband stands in the corner, wringing his hands as he watches his wife's life force draining away, trusting in your expertise because he has no other choice, that he has paid you well for this treatment, a sum that represents a significant portion of his weekly earnings, and he expects results that you cannot guarantee. His presence adds to the pressure you feel, the weight of expectations that rest on your shoulders every time you take up your instruments. As the bowl fills, you make notes in your mind about the quality of the blood. This is your science, your diagnostic tool. The smell, the way it coagulates, the presence of what you believe to be impurities. All of these details inform your understanding of her condition. You have been taught that different types of blood indicate different imbalances, and that by observing these characteristics you can determine not only the cause of the illness, but also the proper course of treatment. When you judge that enough blood has been drawn, approximately half a pint by your estimation, you press a cloth against the wound and bind it with strips of linen that have been used for this purpose countless times before. The cloth, once white, is now permanently stained with the blood of previous patients, but it serves its purpose of stopping the flow and protecting the wound from what you believe to be corrupted air that might enter and cause further problems. The woman leaves, supported by her husband, with instructions to return if the headache persists. You know, though you would never admit it aloud, that if she recovers, it will be despite your treatment, not because of it. This knowledge sits like a stone in your chest, a weight that grows heavier with each passing year of practice. You have seen too many patients return with worsened conditions, too many who never return at all, to maintain the confidence that once characterized your work. Your next patient arrives before you have finished cleaning the blood from your previous procedure. This one is a young apprentice whose master has sent him to you for the removal of a tooth that has been causing him agony for weeks. The tooth is clearly infected, the boy's face swollen and feverish, and you can smell the sickness on his breath from across the room. The odor, a mixture of decay and corruption, fills your nostrils and reminds you of the many similar cases you have treated with varying degrees of success. You have no understanding of germs, no knowledge of bacteria or infection in the way we comprehend these things today. What you see is an imbalance of the humors, a concentration of corrupt matter that must be expelled from the body before it spreads and causes more serious illness. Your approach is direct and brutal by necessity. You will pull the tooth with iron forceps, cauterize the wound with a red-hot iron, and hope that the boy's natural constitution is strong enough to survive the shock. The extraction is not a gentle process. The boy bites down on a leather strap as you work your forceps around the infected tooth, his screams muffled but still audible throughout the building. The forceps, heavy instruments designed more for gripping than precision, require considerable force to maintain their hold on the slippery infected tooth. His blood mixes with pus as you twist and pull, and when the tooth finally comes free, it brings with it fragments of jawbone and a rush of fluid that speaks to the severity of the infection. You reach for your cauterizing iron, heated in the small brazier that burns constantly in the corner of your workshop. The metal glows red hot, and when you press it against the wound, the boy's body convulses with pain that transcends anything he has ever experienced. The smell of burning flesh fills the air, mingling with the other odors that perpetually inhabit your workspace. You believe you are sealing the wound, preventing corruption from spreading, but in reality, you are often introducing new sources of infection through the unsterilized iron and the trauma of the procedure itself. The boy's master pays you with a handful of copper coins and helps carry his semi-conscious apprentice down the narrow stairs. You watch them leave, knowing that the boy faces a difficult recovery. Some patients survive these procedures, their bodies somehow overcoming the trauma and infection through what can only be described as miraculous resilience. Others develop fevers that consume them within days, their families returning to blame you for their death and demand compensation for what they see as your failure. This is the constant tension of your profession. The knowledge that your patient's survival often depends more on luck than on your skill. Yet the inability to admit this truth to yourself or others. You are a healer in a world that has not yet learned how to heal. Practicing medicine in an age when medicine is still indistinguishable from magic, prayer, and desperate hope. The afternoon brings a more complex case. It's a woman in the final stages of pregnancy, her labor having lasted for nearly 2 days without progress. The midwife has sent for you as a last resort, and you arrive at the modest home to find a scene of desperation. The woman lies on her bed, her strength nearly spent, while her husband paces the small room and the midwife wrings her hands in frustration. The air in the room is thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and the fear that permeates every difficult birth. Your knowledge of anatomy is limited and largely incorrect. You understand the human body through the lens of medieval teachings, which describe organs and functions in ways that bear little resemblance to reality. The woman's condition, what we might recognize as a breech birth or other complication, appears to you as yet another imbalance of the humors compounded by the woman's own spiritual state and the position of the planets at the time of her labor. You begin with bloodletting, believing that reducing the woman's blood volume will somehow ease her labor by reducing the pressure within her body. She is too weak to protest as you make the familiar cut, watching her blood flow into your bowl while her husband looks on with growing desperation. The midwife assists you, her own knowledge limited to the traditional practices passed down through generations of women who have learned to birth babies despite, rather than because of, medical intervention. The woman drinks your potion, her husband holding her head while you pour the bitter liquid between her lips. You can see the desperation in his eyes, the way he looks at you as if you possess some divine power to save his wife and child. This faith is both a blessing and a curse. It allows you to function in your role, but it also places an impossible burden on your shoulders, demanding results that your knowledge and tools cannot deliver. When the bloodletting fails to produce the desired result, you turn to other methods that represent the full arsenal of medieval obstetric care. You prepare a mixture of herbs and wine, creating a potion that you believe will strengthen the woman's constitution and encourage the child's birth. The herbs, some beneficial, others potentially harmful, are combined according to recipes you learnt during your apprenticeship, formulas that have been passed down through generations without any real understanding of their effects on the delicate process of childbirth. Hours pass, and the woman's condition continues to deteriorate. You try external manipulation, pressing and pushing on her swollen belly in an attempt to reposition the child according to techniques described in the ancient texts. Your hands are not clean in any meaningful sense, and each touch risks introducing infection, but you persist because you have no other options. The medieval understanding of childbirth is shrouded in superstition and fear, and you are as much a victim of this ignorance as your patient. Eventually, either through your interventions, or despite them, the child is born. The baby is small and weak, but alive, and the woman survives the ordeal, though she will face weeks of recovery from the trauma of prolonged labor and your well-intentioned, but potentially harmful treatments. The husband presses coins into your hand, grateful for what he perceives as your success, while you wonder privately whether your presence helped or hindered the natural process that has been bringing children into the world since the beginning of time. As evening approaches, you face the daily task of cleaning your instruments and preparing for the next day's work. The blood and other fluids from the day's procedures have dried on your tools, and you scrape them clean with a knife, wiping them with a cloth that has seen many such cleanings. Your understanding of contamination is limited to the obvious. You remove the visible signs of previous use, but you have no knowledge of the microscopic world that harbors disease and death on every surface of your workshop. You prepare for sleep, knowing that tomorrow will bring more of the same. More patients whose conditions you cannot truly understand, more treatments that may harm as much as they help, and more of the crushing weight of responsibility for lives that hang in the balance. You are a healer in an age when healing is still more art than science, more prayer than practice, and more hope than knowledge. The training you received during your apprenticeship provided you with techniques and procedures, but it could not give you the understanding of disease and anatomy that would make those procedures truly effective. Your workspace bears the accumulated evidence of your profession. The wooden table is stained dark with blood that has soaked into the grain, impossible to fully remove despite your efforts. The floor is marked with similar stains, and the air carries the permanent scent of your work, blood, infection, fear, and the desperate hope of those who come to you, seeking healing. These odors have become so familiar that you no longer notice them, but they would immediately identify your profession to any visitor who entered your workshop. The guild system that governs your profession provides some structure and support, but it also enforces practices and beliefs that may not serve your patient's best interests. The guild's rules require you to follow established procedures, even when your experience suggests that alternative approaches might be more successful. Innovation is discouraged, and any deviation from accepted practice could result in expulsion from the guild and the loss of your livelihood. Your relationship with the university-trained physicians who serve the wealthy is complex and often antagonistic. They look down upon you as a mere craftsman, someone who works with his hands rather than his mind, while you see them as impractical theorists who have never faced the reality of blood and suffering. Yet you also recognize that their knowledge of ancient texts and medical theory far exceeds your own, and you sometimes wonder what you might accomplish if you had access to their education and resources. The economic realities of your profession add another layer of stress to your daily existence. Most of your patients are poor, able to pay only small amounts for your services, and you must treat a large number of people each day to earn enough to support yourself and your family. This pressure encourages speed over care, leading you to rush through procedures that might benefit from more deliberate attention. The wealthy patients who can afford to pay higher fees are often claimed by the university physicians, leaving you with the cases that are both more challenging and less remunerative. The social status of your profession is ambiguous and constantly shifting. In times of health, you are often viewed with suspicion and mistrust, seen as someone who profits from the suffering of others. In times of plague or epidemic, you become essential, sought after by the same people who normally cross the street to avoid you. This inconsistency in public perception makes it difficult to establish lasting relationships outside your profession, and you find yourself increasingly isolated from normal social interactions. The constant exposure to disease and infection takes its toll on your own health. You have observed that practitioners of your profession often die young, succumbing to the same diseases they attempt to treat in others. Though whether this is due to the inherent dangers of the work or simply the inevitable result of living in an age when disease is ever present, you cannot say. What you do know is that every day brings the risk of infection, and that your intimate contact with sick and dying patients makes you particularly vulnerable to whatever ailments are currently plaguing the city. Your training began as a young boy, when you were apprenticed to a master barber-surgeon who taught you the basic techniques of bloodletting, tooth extraction, and wound care. The apprenticeship lasted 7 years, during which you learned not only the technical aspects of the profession, but also the business skills necessary to establish and maintain a practice. You swept the workshop, cleaned the instruments, and gradually took on more responsibility as your skills developed. The master's knowledge became your knowledge, passed down through generations of practitioners who learned through experience rather than formal education. The candle burns low as you settle into your narrow bed, and in the darkness you can hear the sounds of the city settling into sleep around you. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls the hour, marking the passage of another day in your life as a medieval barber-surgeon. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new patients, and new opportunities to wrestle with the thin line between healing and harming that defines your existence. Your dreams, when they come, are filled with the faces of those you have treated. Some grateful, others accusatory, all looking to you for answers that you do not possess. You are a man of your time, practicing medicine with the tools and knowledge available to you, yet always haunted by the suspicion that you are as much a danger to your patients as the diseases you seek to cure. The weight of this knowledge follows you into sleep, where it mingles with memories of successful treatments and the hope that tomorrow might bring discoveries that will make your work more effective. You dream of techniques that could reduce pain, of instruments that could make more precise cuts, of knowledge that could help you understand the true causes of disease. But you wake to the same reality, the same limitations, the same desperate struggle to help in a world where helping often means harming. This is the reality of being a medieval barber-surgeon. Not the noble healer of romantic imagination, but a flawed human being doing his best, with inadequate tools in an age when medical knowledge was still centuries away from anything we would recognize as effective. You are both healer and potential executioner, savior and possible destroyer, walking the knife's edge between life and death with every cut you make, every treatment you administer, and every patient you touch. The morning will come again, bringing with it the familiar sounds of the city awakening and the inevitable knock on your door from someone seeking relief from pain, disease, or injury. You will rise, sharpen your instruments, and begin another day of practicing medicine in an age when medicine was as much about faith as knowledge, as much about courage as skill. And in that daily struggle, you embody the eternal human desire to heal, to help, to stand against suffering even when the tools at your disposal are woefully inadequate to the task. Chapter 2. The Plague Doctor's Desperate Mission. The year is 1348, and the city of Venice trembles under the weight of an invisible enemy that has arrived with the very trade ships that once brought prosperity. The Black Death has entered the great port city, carried in the holds of Genoese galleys that docked in January with their cargo of silk, spices, and pestilence. In this apocalyptic landscape we meet Master Giovanni di Ventura, a physician whose name will be forgotten by history, but whose story illuminates the profound courage and tragic futility of medieval medicine in the face of humanity's greatest catastrophe. Giovanni had been a respected physician for nearly 2 decades before the plague arrived. His practice catered to Venice's merchant families, treating the familiar ailments of prosperity, gout from rich foods, melancholy from sedentary lifestyles, and the occasional injury from the city's bustling commercial activities. He had built a comfortable life, with a house overlooking one of the smaller canals, a workshop filled with the finest medical instruments money could buy, and a reputation for gentle healing that drew patients from across the city's interconnected neighborhoods. But when the first ships arrived from Kaffa in the Crimea with their cargo of death, Giovanni's world transformed overnight. The plague struck Venice with the force of a divine judgment, claiming victims with a speed and brutality that defied every principle of medicine he had learned during his long apprenticeship. Entire households fell silent within days, and it is estimated that as much as 50% of the city's population would die before the pestilence ran its course. The city's windows were boarded shut and marked with the sign of the cross, while church bells tolled constantly for the dead, creating a soundtrack of mourning that never ceased. The costume itself was a marvel of medieval ingenuity, born from desperation and a complete misunderstanding of how disease spread through the corrupted air that physicians believed carried the pestilence. Giovanni's leather coat, treated with wax and various protective oils, reached nearly to his ankles, designed to create an impermeable barrier between himself and the miasma that he believed surrounded every plague victim. The coat was fashioned from the finest leather available, its surface treated with a mixture of beeswax, camphor, and aromatic oils that were believed to repel the corrupt vapors that carried the disease. Of the 18 doctors registered as plague physicians in Venice in 1348, 5 would die of the disease, 12 would flee the city, and only 1 would remain to continue his practice. It was during these first terrible weeks that Giovanni made the decision that would define the remainder of his life. While other physicians abandoned their patients or barricaded themselves in their homes, he chose to don the protective costume that would become the most haunting symbol of the plague years, the full regalia of a plague doctor. The coat was black, both for practical reasons and symbolic ones. Black leather would hide the inevitable stains of his work, the blood, pus and other bodily fluids that would mark every encounter with the dying. But the color also served a deeper purpose. marking him as a herald of death in a city where death had become the dominant presence. The black coat identified him immediately to the terrified population, warning them of his approach, while simultaneously offering the hope that medical knowledge might yet triumph over the mysterious force that was destroying their world. The most distinctive element of his appearance was the mask, crafted by skilled leatherworkers according to specifications that had been developed by physicians across Europe who faced similar outbreaks. The beak, extending nearly 6 inches from his face, was filled with a mixture of aromatic herbs, spices, and substances believed to purify the air he breathed, rosemary for remembrance, and its supposed power to strengthen memory and ward off corruption, thyme for courage and its ability to fortify the spirit against despair, lavender for its sweet scent to mask the overwhelming smell of death that permeated every corner of the plague-stricken city. The aromatic mixture also included more exotic substances that reflected both the desperation of the times and the wealth of Venice's medical establishment. Powdered viper's flesh, believed to possess powerful protective properties against venomous diseases, crushed pearls that represented purity and perfection, and fragments of precious stones that were thought to emanate healing virtue. These ingredients, each one costing more than most families earned in a month, were combined according to recipes that had been passed down through generations of physicians, formulas that promised protection but delivered only the illusion of safety. The crystal eyepieces, set into the mask like the eyes of some great bird of prey, were covered with clear glass that distorted his vision and fogged with his breath. These lenses, ground by the finest glassmakers in Murano, were considered essential protection against the evil vapors that rose from the bodies of plague victims. When Giovanni looked through these crystal windows, the world took on an otherworldly quality, as if he were viewing the apocalypse through the eyes of some supernatural being sent to witness humanity's final judgment. His gloves, made of the finest leather available, and treated with the same protective oils and herbs that coated his robe, extended nearly to his elbows. They were designed to prevent any direct contact with the infected, though Giovanni did not understand that the plague was transmitted by fleas rather than by corrupted air. The gloves made his work clumsy and imprecise, their thick leather preventing the delicate touch that good medical practice required. But they were considered absolutely essential to his survival in an age when the mechanism of disease transmission remained a complete mystery. The most practical element of his costume was the long wooden staff, nearly 6 feet in length, that he carried everywhere he went. This staff allowed him to examine patients without touching them, to move aside bedding and clothing, and to maintain the physical distance that he believed would protect him from infection. The staff became an extension of his own body, a tool that symbolized both his medical authority and the terrible isolation that the plague had brought to all human relationships. The staff was crafted from strong hardwood, its surface polished smooth, and treated with the same protective substances that coated his clothing. At one end, it was fitted with a metal point that could be used to lift clothing or manipulate objects, while the other end was weighted to provide balance and could serve as a walking stick during his long journeys through the plague-ravaged city. The staff represented the transformation of medical practice, from the intimate relationship between healer and patient, to the distant impersonal contact that fear had made necessary. Giovanni's first house call as a plague doctor took him to the home of Antonio Grimaldi, a silk merchant whose family had been among Giovanni's regular patients for years. The house, once filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the bustle of successful commerce, now lay silent except for the low moaning that drifted from the upper floors and the constant buzzing of flies that had found their way inside. As Giovanni climbed the narrow stairs, his leather coat rustling with each step, he could smell the unmistakable odor of the plague, a sweet, cloying scent that seemed to cling to everything it touched and penetrated even his herb-filled mask. The smell of the plague was unlike anything Giovanni had encountered in his years of medical practice. It was a combination of rotting flesh, infected blood, and something else that defied description. A scent that seemed to carry within it the essence of death itself. Victims of the bubonic plague developed painful lymph node swellings called buboes, primarily around the neck, armpits, and groin, which oozed pus and bled, while their skin became covered in dark blotches. The odor that arose from these infected swellings was overwhelming, and it served as a constant reminder of the enemy he faced. When he reached the family's chambers, he found a scene that would haunt him for the remainder of his days. The merchant's wife lay on her bed, her body racked with fever and covered in the dark swellings that marked the plague's advance. These buboes, as they came to be known, appeared at the lymph nodes in the armpits, groin, and neck, growing to the size of eggs or even larger, filled with poison that the body could not expel. Her skin had taken on the greyish pallor that gave the disease its name, and her breathing came in short, laboured gasps that spoke to the fluid that was filling her lungs. The woman's condition represented the most common form of the plague that Giovanni encountered in his practice. The bubonic plague had a mortality rate of 30 to 75%, with symptoms including fever of 100-105, headaches, painful aching joints, nausea and vomiting, and a general feeling of malaise. Most patients who developed the characteristic buboes died within 4 to 7 days, though some lingered longer in agony before succumbing to the disease. Giovanni had learned to recognize the signs that indicated whether a patient might survive, though his predictions proved accurate less than half the time. Using his staff, Giovanni examined the woman as best he could, noting the progression of the disease according to the medical understanding of his time. He believed he was looking at an extreme corruption of the humours, a condition so severe that it had thrown the entire body into chaos. The black bile, one of the 4 humours that medieval medicine believed governed human health, had clearly gained dominance, overwhelming the other elements, and spreading its corruption throughout her system like poison flowing through her veins. Giovanni's treatment followed the established protocols of his profession, procedures that had been developed over centuries of medical practice, but were woefully inadequate to address the plague's unique characteristics. He began with bloodletting, believing that reducing the woman's blood volume would help restore the balance of her humours. Using instruments attached to his staff, he made careful incisions in her arms, watching as the dark blood flowed into vessels that he positioned using his wooden pole. The blood that emerged was thick and dark, confirming his diagnosis of humoral imbalance and justifying the aggressive treatment he was about to undertake. Next, he applied poultices to the buboes, using his staff to position cloth soaked in various preparations that represented the pinnacle of medieval pharmaceutical knowledge. One poultice contained crushed emeralds mixed with powdered unicorn horn, ingredients that cost more than most families earned in a year, but were believed to have powerful purifying properties that could draw corruption from infected tissue. Another preparation was made from ground pearls and gold leaf, substances that represented purity and perfection, and were thought to restore the natural harmony that disease had disrupted. Giovanni also administered internal remedies, using his staff to hold cups of medicine to the woman's lips, while maintaining the safe distance that his costume required. One mixture contained crushed diamonds dissolved in wine, a preparation that was believed to strengthen the heart and provide the spiritual fortitude necessary to fight off the plague's corruption. Another remedy was made from the ground horn of a rhinoceros mixed with exotic spices from the Far East, substances that had travelled the same trade routes that brought the plague to Venice. These remedies represented the accumulated wisdom of centuries of medical practice, combining the most expensive and rare substances available, with theories about their healing properties that had been developed through careful study of ancient texts. The preparations required enormous expense and considerable skill to create, yet they possessed no actual power to combat the bacterial infection that was destroying the woman's body. Giovanni applied these treatments with the methodical precision that had earned him his reputation, never suspecting that his efforts were not only useless, but potentially harmful. As he worked, Giovanni could hear the sounds of the city beyond the windows, the constant tolling of church bells that marked the passage of the dead, the rumble of carts carrying bodies to mass graves, and the occasional cry of those who had discovered new victims among their families. Venice, once a symphony of commerce and prosperity, had become a requiem for the dying, its familiar sounds replaced by the music of mourning that played day and night without pause. The woman's husband watched Giovanni's ministrations with desperate hope, clinging to the belief that medicine could triumph over this unprecedented catastrophe that had destroyed everything he had worked to build. He had already lost 2 of his children to the plague, their small bodies taken away by the city's overwhelmed death carts, and his wife represented his last connection to the family he had built over decades of hard work and careful planning. And the man's faith in Giovanni's abilities was both touching and tragic, representing the universal human need to believe that knowledge and skill could triumph over forces beyond understanding. Giovanni spent hours at the woman's bedside, applying his treatments with the methodical precision that characterized the best medical practice of his era. He burned aromatic substances in small braziers, filling the room with smoke that he believed would purify the air and drive away the corrupted vapors that fed the disease. The smoke rose in thin columns toward the ceiling, carrying with it the hopes and prayers of all who remained in the plague-stricken house. He positioned mirrors around the room, reflecting candlelight in patterns that were thought to have healing properties according to the astrological theories that influenced medieval medicine. The mirrors, polished to perfection by Venetian craftsmen, were arranged to capture and redirect the life-giving properties of light, creating a web of luminous energy that was supposed to strengthen the patient's natural resistance to disease. These practices reflected the deep integration of medical theory with broader beliefs about the nature of reality, combining empirical observation with mystical understanding in ways that seem strange to modern minds. Giovanni also recited prayers and incantations that combined Christian faith with older, more mysterious traditions that had survived from pre-Christian times. These verbal remedies were considered as important as any physical treatment, representing the physician's role as an intermediary between the natural and supernatural worlds. The words he spoke were believed to possess inherent power, capable of influencing the spiritual forces that medieval medicine saw as the ultimate cause of all disease and healing. But as the hours passed, Giovanni watched helplessly as the woman's condition continued to deteriorate. Despite all his efforts, her breathing became more labored, the buboes continued to grow, and her skin took on an increasingly grey and lifeless appearance that indicated the approach of death. The fever that racked her body seemed to burn away her life force, leaving behind only a shadow of the vibrant woman he had known for years as a patient and friend. In Florence and other Italian cities, infected patients typically died within 3 days, and people could be infected by the smallest contact, even with clothes or other objects handled by the ill. Giovanni had observed similar patterns in Venice, where the disease's progression seemed to follow an inexorable course that no medical intervention could alter. The speed of the plague's advance was perhaps its most terrifying characteristic, transforming healthy individuals into corpses in a matter of days and making any attempt at treatment seem futile. When death finally claimed the woman shortly before dawn, Giovanni felt the familiar weight of failure settle upon his shoulders like a lead cloak. He had applied the best treatments that medieval medicine could offer, had used ingredients that represented fortunes, and had followed procedures that had been developed by the greatest medical minds of his age. Yet, the plague had claimed another victim, indifferent to his efforts and expertise, immune to the centuries of accumulated medical knowledge that he had brought to bear against it. The woman's husband collapsed beside her bed, his grief mixing with confusion and anger that threatened to overwhelm his reason. He had trusted in Giovanni's skill, had paid enormous sums for the exotic treatments, and had believed that medicine could triumph over the mysterious force that was destroying his city. Yet Giovanni could offer no explanation that would satisfy the bereaved man, no medical theory that could account for the plague's relentless advance through every defense that human knowledge could construct. As Giovanni left the Grimaldi house, his leather coat rustling in the pre-dawn silence, he carried with him the growing realization that he was fighting a battle he could not win. The plague seemed to mock every principle of medicine he had learned, every treatment he applied, and every theory he had studied during his long years of training. It struck the young and the old, the healthy and the sick, the wealthy and the poor with equal savagery, suggesting that the natural order itself had been overturned by some force beyond human comprehension. His next calls took him through a city that was gradually emptying itself of life. Entire neighborhoods had been abandoned, their residents either dead or fled to the countryside in desperate attempts to escape the plague's reach. The canals, once busy with merchant traffic and the boats of fishermen and traders, now carried mainly the vessels of the dead carts, ferrying bodies to the islands where mass graves had been dug to accommodate the unprecedented number of victims. At each house, Giovanni encountered the same horrific scenes that would become the defining images of his memory: families destroyed by the plague, survivors clinging to hope that medicine could save their loved ones, and the inevitable failure of every treatment he attempted. He administered his bloodletting, applied his expensive poultices, and dispensed his exotic remedies, but the plague continued its relentless advance, claiming victim after victim with a consistency that began to drive him toward despair. The psychological toll of his work began to manifest in ways that Giovanni had never experienced during his years of normal medical practice. He found himself unable to sleep, haunted by the faces of those he had failed to save, their grey features and pain-filled eyes pursuing him through endless corridors of guilt and self-doubt. When he did manage to rest, his dreams were filled with images of the dying, their swollen buboes and laboured breathing creating a nightmare landscape from which there was no escape. He began to lose weight, his appetite destroyed by the constant exposure to suffering and his own growing sense of inadequacy as a healer. Food had lost its taste. Water seemed to carry the smell of corruption, and even wine, which had once provided comfort and relaxation, now tasted bitter and offered no relief from the memories that tormented his waking hours. The physical deterioration of his body paralleled the erosion of his confidence, creating a downward spiral that threatened to destroy him as surely as the plague was destroying his patients. The isolation of his profession became another source of torment that added to his daily burden. The plague doctor's costume, which was meant to protect him from infection, also served to separate him from normal human contact in ways that were psychologically devastating. That children fled screaming when they saw his masked figure approaching. Adults crossed themselves and muttered prayers for protection, and even his colleagues in the medical profession began to avoid him, as if his association with the plague had made him a carrier of doom. Giovanni's own family had long since fled Venice, joining the exodus of those who could afford to seek safety in the countryside where the plague had not yet reached. His wife had begged him to abandon his practice and come with them, but he had felt bound by duty to remain in the city and tend to those who could not escape. Now, as the plague entered its third month in Venice, he began to question whether his noble intentions had been worth the price he was paying in isolation, despair, and the growing certainty that his efforts were making no difference in the face of such overwhelming catastrophe. The religious implications of the plague began to weigh heavily on Giovanni's mind, as he struggled to understand the meaning of the catastrophe that had befallen his city. The Church taught that the pestilence was a divine punishment for humanity's sins, a cleansing fire sent by God to purify the world of corruption. If this was true, then his efforts to heal the sick were potentially working against divine will, interfering with a celestial plan that was beyond human understanding or resistance. The religious implications of the plague began to weigh heavily on Giovanni's mind, as he struggled to understand the meaning of the catastrophe that had befallen his city. The Church taught that the pestilence was a divine punishment for humanity's sins, a cleansing fire sent by God to purify the world of corruption. If this was true, then his efforts to heal the sick were potentially working against divine will, interfering with a celestial plan that was beyond human understanding or resistance. This theological dilemma created a crisis of faith that was perhaps more devastating than the physical challenges of treating plague victims. Giovanni had always seen his medical practice as a form of service to God, using the knowledge and skills he had been given to ease suffering and preserve life. But if the plague was indeed divine punishment, then his work became an act of rebellion against heavenly justice, an attempt to thwart God's plan for humanity's purification through suffering and death. The moral complexity of his situation kept him awake at night, wrestling with questions that had no clear answers, and struggling with doubts that threatened to undermine everything he believed about his profession and purpose. He found himself praying for guidance, asking God to reveal whether he should continue his work or abandon it in submission to divine will. But the heavens remained silent, offering no sign that could resolve the terrible uncertainty that consumed his thoughts. As autumn approached, and the plague showed no signs of abating, Giovanni made a decision that reflected both his growing desperation and his unwavering commitment to his calling. He began to keep a detailed journal of his experiences, documenting not only the medical aspects of the plague, but also its psychological, social, and spiritual dimensions. The journal became his confidant, the only place where he could express the doubts and fears that his professional role required him to hide from his patients and their families. His journal entries from this period reveal a man struggling to maintain his professional composure while confronting the complete inadequacy of medieval medicine in the face of the plague's onslaught. He wrote about the terrible irony of being a healer in an age when healing seemed impossible, about the weight of expectations from families who looked to him for miracles he could not provide, and about the slow erosion of his own faith in the medical principles that had guided his career and shaped his understanding of his place in the world. "I have applied every treatment known to our profession," he wrote in one entry, "and yet the plague advances as if our medicine were no more than wind against a storm. I begin to wonder whether we are healers or merely witnesses to suffering, whether our interventions help or harm, whether the ancient texts that guide our practice contain wisdom or folly. Each day brings new failures, new deaths, new reasons to doubt everything I have learned and believed about the art of healing." Giovanni's final weeks in Venice were marked by a growing sense of futility that bordered on madness, and he continued to make his rounds, donning his leather costume each morning and walking through the increasingly empty streets. But his treatments became more desperate and less methodical, reflecting his abandonment of hope. rather than any coherent therapeutic approach, and he began to experiment with combinations of remedies that had no basis in established medical theory, mixing substances in ways that reflected his growing desperation rather than any rational understanding of their properties or effects. The city around him continued its slide into chaos and despair. Venice had pioneered organized responses, including committees ordering ship inspections, burning contaminated vessels, shutting down taverns, and restricting wine from unknown sources. The government struggled to maintain order in the face of the plague's devastation, implementing emergency measures that had never been tried before in human history. The church bells that had once marked the passage of time and called the faithful to prayer now tolled constantly for the dead, creating a soundtrack of mourning that drove some survivors to the edge of sanity. Bodies lay in the streets, unburied, because the death carts could no longer keep pace with the mounting casualties that overwhelmed every system designed to deal with mortality. The canals, once the arteries of commerce that had made Venice wealthy, now carried mainly the boats of the grave diggers, ferrying corpses to the islands where mass graves had been dug in the sandy soil. The familiar rhythms of city life had been replaced by the mechanics of death, creating a world that seemed more like a vision of hell than the prosperous trading center that Venice had been only months before. Giovanni's own infection began as a small swelling in his left armpit, barely noticeable beneath the heavy leather of his protective coat. At first, he convinced himself that it was merely a minor irritation, perhaps caused by the constant chafing of his costume against his skin during long hours of medical practice. But as the days passed, the swelling grew larger and more painful, and he began to experience the fever that he had observed in so many of his patients over the preceding months. The irony was not lost on him. After months of treating plague victims while believing himself protected by his costume and his medical knowledge, he had succumbed to the very disease he had fought so desperately to cure. Of the 18 men registered as plague doctors in Venice in 1348, 5 would die of the disease, and Giovanni was destined to join their number, despite all his precautions and expertise. In his final journal entries written with a trembling hand as the fever consumed his strength, Giovanni reflected on the futility of his efforts and the broader implications of the plague for the future of medicine. "I have become what I sought to heal," he wrote, his handwriting growing increasingly erratic as the disease progressed. "And in my infection, I see the ultimate judgment on our profession. We are not healers but pretenders, not saviors but fellow victims, not masters of disease but servants of death. The plague has taught me that our medicine is built on foundations of sand, that our treatments are rituals performed for the comfort of the living rather than the healing of the sick, that our knowledge is ignorance dressed in the robes of authority." His final entries became increasingly philosophical and spiritual, reflecting his attempt to find meaning in the catastrophe that had consumed his life and city. "Perhaps," he wrote, "the plague is not our enemy but our teacher, showing us the limits of human knowledge and the foolishness of believing we can control forces beyond our understanding. Perhaps our role is not to cure but to comfort, not to prevent death, but to ease the journey toward it, not to triumph over disease but to learn humility in its presence." Giovanni di Ventura died on a cold October morning in 1348, alone in his house overlooking the canal that had once carried the ships of merchants seeking fortune. His leather costume still hung on its hook beside his bed, waiting for a physician who would never again don its protective embrace. His journal, discovered days later by city officials searching empty houses for signs of life, provided one of the most detailed and moving accounts of the plague's impact on the medical profession and the human cost of trying to heal in an age when healing was beyond reach. His story, multiplied by thousands across Europe, illustrated the profound challenge that the Black Death posed to medieval medicine and the tragic courage of those who fought a battle they could not understand or win. The plague doctor's costume, which had become such a powerful symbol of the fight against the pestilence, ultimately proved to be as ineffective as every other remedy that medieval medicine could offer against the bacterial infection that was decimating European civilization. Giovanni's legacy reminds us that healing is not just about knowledge and technique, but also about the courage to face the unknown, the strength to persist in the face of repeated failure, and the humanity to offer comfort when cure is impossible. His journal entries reveal a man who never lost his compassion for the suffering, even as he lost faith in his ability to relieve it, and who continued to serve his community, even when that service seemed futile and dangerous. The plague would eventually run its course in Venice, leaving behind a transformed city with half its population buried in mass graves on distant islands. The survivors would slowly rebuild their lives and their community, carrying with them the memory of the terrible months when death stalked the canals, and the most dedicated healers proved powerless to stop its advance. Giovanni's story stands as a testament to the physicians who tried to fight the plague with the tools available to them. Men and women who faced the ultimate medical challenge with courage, dedication, and a faith in healing that persisted even in the face of overwhelming evidence that their efforts were doomed to fail. Chapter 3: The Lost Remedies of Hildegard von Bingen. As we leave behind the tragic world of the plague doctor, we journey now to a place where healing took on an entirely different character. The monastery gardens and scriptoriums of 12th century Germany, where a remarkable woman named Hildegard von Bingen was quietly revolutionizing the practice of medicine through a unique combination of mystical vision and practical knowledge that would influence healing traditions for centuries to come. Picture, if you will, the Benedictine monastery of Rupertsberg, nestled in the rolling hills along the Rhine River. Sometime around the year 11, the morning mist rises from the valley below, and the first light of dawn illuminates the carefully tended gardens, where rows of herbs grow in ordered abundance. This is a world apart from the blood-soaked workshops of barber-surgeons, or the desperate battles of plague doctors. Here, medicine is practiced as both art and prayer, combining the accumulated wisdom of ancient texts with direct observation of nature's healing properties. Hildegard herself defies easy categorization in the medieval world. At a time when women were largely excluded from formal medical education, she had become one of the most respected healers in the German territories. Her authority came not from university training, which was denied to women, but from something far more mysterious and powerful in the medieval mind. Divine revelation combined with an extraordinary gift for practical observation that would prove remarkably accurate by modern scientific standards. Born into a noble family around 198, Hildegard had been given to the church as a child, a common practice for families seeking to secure their daughters' futures while demonstrating their piety. But what began as a conventional religious life soon blossomed into something remarkable. From her earliest years, Hildegard claimed to experience visions, not the hysterical fantasies that medieval society often attributed to women, but detailed, coherent revelations that encompassed everything from theology to natural philosophy to the healing arts. Her medical knowledge came to her, she claimed, through these visions, which showed her the hidden properties of plants, the secret workings of the human body, and the cosmic connections that linked all living things. To modern minds, this might seem like superstition or delusion, but Hildegard's visions consistently led her to practical discoveries that proved remarkably effective, a success rate that earned her recognition from popes, emperors, and the leading scholars of her age. Modern statistical analysis of Hildegard's medical claims reveals something extraordinary. In her works Physica and Causa et Cura, she offers 37 claims of health benefits from 125 different plants. When researchers applied rigorous statistical methods to test whether her accurate claims could have occurred by chance, they found there was only a 1 in 10,000 probability that her successes were random. The hypothesis that Hildegard could have achieved her correct claims purely by chance can be clearly rejected, suggesting that her knowledge came from systematic observation and experience, rather than mere guesswork. The monastery garden where Hildegard conducted much of her research was itself a marvel of medieval agricultural science, and like the chaotic herb plots that surrounded most homes, where plants grew in random profusion, the monastic garden was laid out according to careful principles that reflected both practical necessity and symbolic meaning. Each plant had its designated place, chosen not only for optimal growing conditions, but also for the role it played in the cosmic order that Hildegard believed governed all existence. Monastery gardens followed the rules established around 840 AD by Walafrid Strabo, Benedictine monk, poet, and botanist, whose book, Liber de Cultura Autorum, used verse to describe 24 healing plants, their characteristics, and the ways they could be used. The book became one of the most important botanical works of the Middle Ages, and its influence shaped the design and plant selection of monastery gardens across Europe for centuries. Walking through her garden in the early morning, when the dew still clung to the leaves, and the air carried the mingled scents of dozens of different herbs, was like entering a living pharmacy. Here grew the familiar plants that formed the backbone of medieval medicine. There, rosemary for strengthening memory and circulation, sage for purifying corrupted humors, and thyme for respiratory ailments. But Hildegard's garden also contained more exotic specimens, plants that she had acquired through the monastery's extensive network of correspondence across Europe and beyond. The garden was divided into several distinct areas, each serving specific purposes in the monastery's complex ecosystem of healing and sustenance. The hortus, or vegetable garden, provided food for the community, while the pomarium contained fruit trees and orchards. Most important for Hildegard's work was the herbularium, or physic garden, where medicinal plants were cultivated with the same care and attention that other monasteries devoted to their most precious manuscripts. One of the most prized areas of the garden was devoted to what Hildegard called the golden herbs, plants that she believed carried special healing properties due to their color and the way they interacted with sunlight. Here grew St. John's wort, its bright yellow flowers opening to the summer sun, which Hildegard prescribed for what we would now recognize as depression and anxiety. She had observed that patients who consumed preparations made from this plant showed improved spirits and greater emotional stability, particularly during the dark months of winter, when the lack of sunlight seemed to drain people's vitality. St. John's wort was known to Hildegard by several names, including the Bells of the Virgin Mary, reflecting the deep spiritual significance that medieval practitioners attached to their healing plants. Every herb, every tree, and every flower had its own special quality, and the names given to plants often reflected their sacred properties rather than their botanical characteristics. This integration of spiritual and medical understanding was fundamental to monastery medicine, where healing was seen as a collaboration between human knowledge and divine grace. Nearby grew beds of foxglove, its tall spikes of purple flowers both beautiful and dangerous. Hildegard had learned through careful experimentation that tiny amounts of this plant could strengthen the heart's rhythm and improve circulation, but she also knew that larger doses could prove fatal. Her writings contained detailed instructions for preparing foxglove remedies, including warnings about proper dosage that demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of the plant's properties that would not be fully explained by modern science until centuries later. The willow trees that bordered the garden provided another of Hildegard's most reliable remedies. She had discovered that the inner bark, when prepared properly, could relieve pain and reduce fever, effects that we now know come from salicin, the precursor to modern aspirin. But Hildegard's understanding went beyond the simple observation that willow bark eased suffering. She believed that the tree's ability to bend without breaking in strong winds was connected to its power to help the human body adapt to the stresses of illness and injury. This type of symbolic thinking, known as the doctrine of signatures, was fundamental to medieval medicine. Plants that resembled human organs or conditions were believed to be specially suited to treat those ailments. Lungwort, whose mottled leaves resembled diseased lungs, was used for respiratory issues and remains a common remedy among modern herbalists for breathing difficulties and coughs. Hildegard's approach combined this symbolic understanding with careful empirical observation, creating a system of medicine that was both mystical and practical. In the monastery scriptorium, where monks and nuns spent their days copying manuscripts and creating illuminated texts, Hildegard worked on what would become her masterpiece, Physica, a comprehensive guide to the healing properties of plants, animals, and minerals that represented the culmination of a lifetime's worth of observation and experimentation. Unlike the dry academic texts that dominated medieval medical literature, Hildegard's work pulsed with the vitality of direct experience and personal discovery. Each entry in Physica combined practical information about preparation and dosage, with deeper insights into the spiritual and cosmic significance of each remedy. For Hildegard, healing was never simply a matter of applying the right substance to the right ailment. It required an understanding of the patient's entire being, physical, emotional, and spiritual, and the ways in which individual suffering connected to the broader patterns of creation. Consider her treatment of lavender, which she called one of the most powerful healing plants in her arsenal. Hildegard prescribed lavender, not only for its calming effects on the nervous system, but also for its ability to restore what she called the proper order of the soul. She believed that many physical ailments arose from spiritual imbalances, and that lavender's sweet scent and gentle properties could help realign a person's inner nature with the divine harmony that governed the universe. Her preparation methods were elaborate rituals that combined practical technique with spiritual practice to create her lavender remedy. Hildegard would harvest the flowers at specific times, preferably at dawn on a clear day when the dew was still fresh and the plant's essential oils were at their most concentrated. The timing was crucial, as she believed that plants gathered at certain hours possessed greater healing virtue than those collected at random times. The flowers were then dried in the monastery's herb room, a specially designed space with carefully controlled ventilation that allowed moisture to escape while preserving the plant's active compounds. The room was oriented to catch the morning sun, but avoid the harsh heat of midday, creating optimal conditions for preserving the delicate aromatic principles that gave herbs their healing power. The dried lavender was then combined with other ingredients according to recipes that Hildegard claimed had been revealed to her in visions. One of her most effective preparations combined lavender with honey from the monastery's beehives, white wine made from grapes grown in the Rhine Valley, and small amounts of powdered pearls or other precious stones that she believed added their own healing virtues to the mixture. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Hildegard's medical practice was her understanding of what we would now call psychosomatic medicine, the recognition that emotional and spiritual states could profoundly affect physical health. She had observed that patients who came to her in states of despair or spiritual turmoil often suffered from physical symptoms that seemed to have no clear cause, while those who maintained hope and faith tended to recover more quickly from even serious illnesses. This insight led Hildegard to develop treatment approaches that addressed the whole person rather than just specific symptoms. A patient suffering from what we might recognize as chronic fatigue, for example, would receive not only herbal remedies to strengthen the body, but also spiritual counseling, music therapy, and carefully designed dietary regimens that reflected her understanding of how different foods affected both physical and emotional well-being. Her use of music as medicine was particularly innovative. Hildegard believed that the human body was naturally attuned to certain harmonic frequencies, and that illness often resulted from a disruption of these internal rhythms. She composed specific melodies and chants that were designed to restore harmonic balance, and her patients would often spend hours listening to these healing songs as part of their treatment. The concept of viriditas, or greenness, was central to Hildegard's understanding of health and healing. This term, which she appears to have coined, represented the life force that animated all living things, the creative power that caused plants to grow, wounds to heal, and bodies to maintain themselves in health. Disease, in Hildegard's view, was fundamentally a loss of viriditas, a drying up of the life force that left the body vulnerable to corruption and decay. The monastery's infirmary, where Hildegard treated the most serious cases, was designed according to principles that reflected her holistic approach to healing. The rooms were positioned to receive optimal natural light, with large windows that could be opened to allow fresh air circulation. The walls were painted in colors that Hildegard believed promoted healing, soft greens and blues that echoed the colors of growing plants and flowing water. Each patient's bed was surrounded by carefully chosen plants and flowers, selected not only for their medicinal properties, but also for their psychological effects. Hildegard had observed that patients who were surrounded by beauty and natural harmony recovered more quickly than those confined to stark, clinical environments. The infirmary garden, visible through the windows, was planted with herbs and flowers chosen specifically for their healing scents and uplifting visual effects. One of Hildegard's most famous patients was a young monk named Brother Andreas, who had been suffering from what appeared to be a wasting disease that had baffled the monastery's other healers. The young man had been losing weight steadily for months, despite eating regular meals, and had developed a persistent cough that kept him awake at night. The traditional treatments, bloodletting and purging, had only weakened him further, and his condition seemed to worsen with each intervention. When Andreas was brought to Hildegard's infirmary, she began her treatment not with physical remedies but with careful observation and spiritual counseling. Through long conversations with the young monk, she discovered that his illness had begun shortly after he had been assigned to work in the monastery's library, copying theological texts that dealt with themes of sin and divine judgment. The work had filled him with dread and anxiety about his own spiritual state, creating what Hildegard recognized as a dangerous imbalance in his mental and physical constitution. Hildegard realized that Andreas was suffering from what she called dryness of the soul, a spiritual condition in which excessive focus on humanity's fallen nature had created an imbalance that was manifesting as physical symptoms. His body was literally wasting away because his spirit had lost connection with the life-giving force that Hildegard believed flowed through all creation. The cure would require not just physical remedies, but a fundamental restoration of his relationship with the divine source of all healing. Her treatment for Andreas combined herbal remedies with what we might recognize as an early form of psychotherapy. She prescribed teas made from herbs that she associated with joy and spiritual renewal, lemon balm, chamomile, and rose petals, while also engaging him in daily conversations designed to restore his sense of wonder and connection to the divine presence in nature. These discussions were as important as any medicine, helping to heal the spiritual wounds that were causing his physical deterioration. Perhaps most importantly, she reassigned Andreas to work in the monastery garden, where he could spend his days tending plants and observing the cycles of growth and renewal that Hildegard believed were essential to spiritual health. The combination of physical activity, exposure to natural beauty, and meaningful work gradually restored Andreas to health, providing a powerful demonstration of Hildegard's holistic approach to healing that addressed body, mind, and spirit as interconnected aspects of a single whole. The herbal preparations that formed the backbone of Hildegard's medical practice were created according to methods that combined scientific observation with spiritual practice. In the monastery's preparation room, she and her assistants would spend hours grinding herbs, mixing tinctures, and creating the complex compounds that made up her pharmacopoeia. The work was regarded as a sacred activity, requiring the same devotion and attention that other monastics gave to prayer and contemplation. One of her most sophisticated preparations was a remedy for heart conditions that combined several plants in carefully calibrated proportions. The primary ingredient was hawthorn, whose flowers and berries Hildegard had observed could strengthen the heart's rhythm and improve circulation. To this she added small amounts of motherwort, an herb that seemed to calm irregular heartbeats, and rose petals, which she believed helped to open emotional blockages that might be contributing to physical symptoms. The preparation process itself was treated as a form of prayer. Hildegard believed that the healer's spiritual state, while creating remedies, could affect their potency. So she and her assistants would often fast and engage in extended prayer before beginning their work. The herbs were ground using mortars and pestles that had been blessed and consecrated for this purpose, and the mixing was done according to specific rhythms that Hildegard associated with the cosmic harmonies she perceived in her visions. Perhaps the most mysterious aspect of Hildegard's practice was her use of gemstones and metals in healing. Unlike many of her contemporaries, who used precious substances primarily for their symbolic value or because of their cost, Hildegard claimed to have direct knowledge of the specific healing properties of different stones and metals, knowledge that came to her through the same visionary experiences that guided her herbal practice. She prescribed emeralds for eye conditions, believing that the stone's green color was connected to the life force that animated all growing things. The emerald's verdant hue was thought to strengthen the viridities within the patient, restoring the natural vitality that disease had diminished. Sapphires were used for mental clarity and spiritual insight, while rubies were reserved for conditions involving the blood and circulation. These prescriptions might seem like mere superstition to modern minds, but recent research has begun to explore the possibility that certain minerals might indeed have subtle effects on human physiology through mechanisms we are only beginning to understand. Hildegard's influence extended far beyond her own monastery through an extensive correspondence with other religious houses, noble families, and even popes and emperors. She shared her knowledge and methods with healers across Europe, creating a network of practitioners who applied her techniques in their own communities. Her letters, many of which survive today, provide fascinating glimpses into the practice of medieval medicine at its most sophisticated level. In one letter to a noblewoman suffering from what appears to have been severe depression, Hildegard prescribed a regimen that combined herbal remedies with dietary changes, music therapy, and spiritual exercises. She recommended teas made from St. John's wort and lemon balm, along with regular consumption of foods that she associated with joy and vitality, fresh fruits, honey, and certain types of fish that she believed carried special nutritional properties. But perhaps more remarkably, she also prescribed specific activities designed to restore the woman's sense of purpose and connection to the larger world. These included caring for animals, working in a garden, and participating in musical performances, recommendations that would not seem out of place in a modern treatment program for depression. The holistic nature of Hildegard's approach, addressing physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of illness, anticipated developments in medical thinking that would not become mainstream until the 20th century. The monastery's pharmacy was a testament to the sophistication of Hildegard's medical practice. Here, raw materials were stored in carefully labeled containers made of glass, ceramic, and precious metals. Each substance was prepared according to specific procedures that had been developed through years of experimentation. Herbal mixtures often contained hundreds of ingredients, some of which are still used today in products like Benedictine tincture, which traces its origins back to medieval monastic medicine. Other forms of medicines prepared in the monastery included ointments for external application, extracts concentrated through careful distillation, and decoctions created by boiling herbs in water or wine. Wine was used both as a disinfectant and as a solvent for extracting the active principles from medicinal plants. The monastery's own vineyards provided wine of known quality and purity, ensuring that this crucial ingredient met the high standards required for pharmaceutical use. The integration of agriculture and medicine was fundamental to monastery life. Monks were responsible for cultivating and harvesting medicinal plants, creating a system where healers had direct control over the quality and freshness of their raw materials. This integration also allowed for careful observation of how growing conditions affected the potency of different plants, leading to sophisticated understanding of factors like soil composition, weather patterns, and harvesting times that influenced therapeutic effectiveness. Hildegard's medical practice was also influenced by the astronomical theories that were central to medieval understanding of the natural world. She believed that the positions of planets and stars affected both the growth of plants and the health of human beings, and she timed many of her treatments according to astrological calculations. While this might seem unscientific by modern standards, it reflected a sophisticated understanding of natural cycles and rhythms that modern chronobiology has begun to validate. The monastery day was structured around the canonical hours, the 8 periods of prayer that marked the passage of time from dawn to dusk. This rhythm created natural opportunities for observing patients and administering treatments at regular intervals, ensuring that healing was integrated into the spiritual life of the community rather than being treated as a separate activity. The bells that called the monks to prayer also reminded healers when it was time to check on patients, give medicines, or perform other therapeutic activities. Hildegard's approach to nutrition was far ahead of its time, recognizing that food could be medicine and that dietary choices profoundly affected health and well-being. She developed detailed recommendations for different types of patients, taking into account not only their physical symptoms but also their temperament, age, and spiritual condition. Her dietary prescriptions were based on the principle that foods, like herbs, possessed specific qualities that could be used to restore balance and promote healing. For patients suffering from melancholy, she recommended foods that were warming and moistening, such as chicken broth, fresh fruits, and wine diluted with water. Those with too much heat in their constitution were given cooling foods like cucumber, lettuce, and barley water. The complexity of her nutritional recommendations reflected a deep understanding of how different foods affected both physical and emotional states, anticipating modern research into the connections between diet and mental health. The legacy of Hildegard's work extends far beyond the medieval period. Many of her herbal remedies have been validated by modern scientific research, and her holistic approach to healing has influenced contemporary movements in integrative medicine. Her understanding that physical health is intimately connected to emotional and spiritual well-being has proven to be far ahead of its time, anticipating developments in medical thinking that would not become mainstream until centuries after her death. Modern pharmaceutical companies have begun to study medieval monastic texts, including Hildegard's works, as sources of new drug discoveries. Researchers at the University of Würzburg in Germany have established collaborations with pharmaceutical companies to investigate the physiological effects of remedies documented in monastery texts, leading to the development of products for treating common conditions like colds and respiratory ailments. But perhaps most importantly, Hildegard's story reminds us that the history of medicine is not simply a progression from ignorance to knowledge, but a complex tapestry in which insights and wisdom can emerge from unexpected sources. In an age when medical knowledge was largely controlled by male authorities and based on ancient texts rather than direct observation, a woman claiming divine revelation managed to develop healing methods that were often more effective than the established practices of her time. As we sit here in our modern world, surrounded by the miracles of contemporary medicine, we might reflect on the courage and wisdom of healers like Hildegard, who trusted in their own observations and intuitions even when they challenged the accepted wisdom of their age. Her monastery garden, with its carefully tended herbs and its atmosphere of prayer and contemplation, offers us a different model of healing, one that recognizes the profound connections between body, mind, and spirit, and the importance of treating the whole person rather than just the disease. The mystery of how Hildegard acquired her remarkable knowledge remains unsolved. Whether her insights came through divine revelation, as she claimed, or through some other form of intuitive understanding that we do not yet fully comprehend, her legacy stands as a testament to the power of careful observation, compassionate care, and the recognition that healing is as much an art as it is a science. Her work reminds us that the natural world contains healing wisdom that we are still discovering, and that the integration of spiritual and medical understanding may be essential for truly effective healing. The monastery garden where she worked continues to inspire modern herbalists and healers, while her writings provide a window into a time when medicine was practiced with reverence for the sacred dimensions of life and health. In our age of technological medicine, Hildegard's approach offers valuable insights into the importance of treating patients as whole human beings rather than collections of symptoms. Her recognition that healing involves the restoration of harmony between the individual and the larger cosmos speaks to enduring truths about health and wellness that transcend the specific practices of any particular era. The green world that Hildegard celebrated in her concept of viriditas continues to offer healing to those who seek it, reminding us that our connection to nature is not merely aesthetic or spiritual, but fundamentally necessary for our health and well-being. Her legacy lives on in every garden where healing herbs are grown, in every practice that honors the integration of body and spirit, and in every healer who recognizes that true medicine must address the whole person rather than just the disease. Chapter 4. The Gilded Poison. Life as a Royal Physician. From the peaceful monastery gardens where Hildegard practiced her healing arts, we now enter a world of silk and gold, of marble halls and whispered conspiracies, where medicine was practiced under the watchful eyes of kings and queens, whose favor could elevate a physician to unimaginable wealth, but whose displeasure could result in swift and brutal execution. This is the world of the royal physician, where healing the powerful was perhaps the most dangerous profession in medieval society. Imagine yourself in the year 1285, walking through the corridors of the Palace of Westminster, your soft leather shoes making barely a whisper against the polished stone floors, your Master Robert de Ashby, personal physician to King Edward I of England, and as you make your way to the royal chambers for the morning consultation, you carry with you not only your medical instruments, but also the constant weight of knowing that your patient's health, or lack thereof, could determine whether you live to see another sunrise. The royal physicians' quarters were a world apart from the humble workshops of barber-surgeons, or even the comfortable practices of town doctors. Your chambers occupied an entire wing of the palace, with rooms dedicated to different aspects of your profession that reflected both the wealth of the royal court and the elaborate nature of treating monarchs. And the consultation room, where you examined the king and other members of the royal family, was furnished with the finest materials money could procure, and Persian carpets covered the floors, tapestries from Flanders adorned the walls, and the examination table was crafted from ebony inlaid with ivory and gold that had been transported from distant corners of the world. Your medical instruments represented the pinnacle of medieval craftsmanship, each piece designed and forged by master artisans who understood that their work would be used to treat the most powerful person in the realm. The surgical knives were forged from the finest Damascus steel, their handles decorated with precious stones and intricate metalwork that served both aesthetic and practical purposes. And your astrological charts, essential for determining the proper timing of treatments, were created by the most skilled cartographers and illuminators in the kingdom, their precise calculations and beautiful decorations reflecting both scientific knowledge and artistic mastery. But perhaps most impressive was your pharmacy, a series of rooms filled with the rarest and most expensive substances that medieval medicine could offer. Here, in carefully labeled containers made of crystal, silver, and carved ivory, you stored ingredients that had been gathered from the far corners of the known world. Unicorn horn, which was actually narwhal tusk imported at enormous expense from Arctic waters, sat alongside bezoar stones, concretions taken from the stomachs of exotic animals that were believed to neutralize any poison that might threaten the royal life. These unicorn horns, valued at 10 times their weight in gold, were considered essential protection against the constant threat of poisoning that shadowed royal courts. The horns were believed to sweat and tremble if poison was nearby, and were routinely waved over banquet tables and plunged into food and drink before the royal family ate. European nobility from the Medicis to Mary Queen of Scots relied on these precious tusks, never suspecting that they were purchasing the teeth of Arctic whales rather than the horns of mythical beasts. The preparation of royal remedies was itself a ritualized process that reflected both medical theory and the expectations of majesty. When King Edward complained of digestive troubles, a common ailment given the rich diet and sedentary lifestyle of royalty, you would begin by consulting your astrological charts to determine the most auspicious time for treatment. The position of the planets, the phase of the moon, and the patient's own birth chart all played crucial roles in deciding not only when to administer medicine, but also which ingredients would be most effective during that particular celestial configuration. The remedy you prepared for the king's stomach ailment exemplified the extraordinary nature of royal medicine. The primary ingredient was powdered pearls, ground to the finest consistency using mortars made from agate stone. These pearls, each one perfect and lustrous, were believed to possess cooling properties that could calm the heat of inflammation while also demonstrating the purity and perfection appropriate for royal consumption. The very act of consuming such precious substances was thought to elevate the royal constitution and strengthen the divine connection that made kingship possible. To the pearl powder, you added ground emeralds, their green color associated with the life force and regenerative power that you hoped to impart to the king's digestion. A small amount of powdered gold was included, not only for its supposed medicinal virtues but also because it was considered fitting that the king's medicine should contain the most precious metal in creation. The mixture was then dissolved in wine that had been blessed by the Archbishop of Canterbury and aged in cellars beneath the palace for decades, creating a remedy that combined the finest earthly substances with divine blessing. The process of administering this remedy required its own elaborate protocol that reflected the dangerous nature of treating royalty. You approached the king's bedchamber, accompanied by 2 assistants, one carrying the medicine in a golden chalice, the other bearing a silver tray with additional implements that might be needed during the consultation. The king's food taster was present to sample the medicine before it touched the royal lips, a precaution that had become standard practice given the constant threat of poisoning that hung over medieval courts like a persistent shadow. As you offered the chalice to King Edward, you watched his face carefully for any sign of displeasure or adverse reaction. The king's mood could change in an instant, and a medicine that tasted too bitter or produced unexpected effects could quickly transform you from trusted healer into suspected assassin. The political implications of royal medicine meant that every treatment was also a test of loyalty, every remedy a potential weapon that could be turned against you if circumstances changed or enemies sought to undermine your position. The constant threat of poisoning created an atmosphere of paranoia that pervaded every aspect of your practice. Medieval courts were hotbeds of intrigue, where ambitious nobles, foreign agents, and disgruntled courtiers all had reasons to wish harm upon the monarch. As the person with the most intimate access to the king's body, you were both the most trusted and the most suspected member of his household, walking a treacherous line between healing and harming that required constant vigilance and political acumen. This suspicion manifested in elaborate security measures that governed your daily routine, and transformed simple medical procedures into complex ceremonial events. All ingredients for royal medicines had to be obtained through approved channels, with each substance tested and verified by multiple authorities before it entered your pharmacy. Your assistants were chosen as much for their loyalty as for their medical knowledge, and they were required to take solemn oaths of secrecy regarding the treatments they helped prepare. The consequences of betraying these oaths were severe, ranging from exile to execution depending on the nature of the breach. Perhaps most significantly, you were required to taste every medicine before administering it to the king, a practice that served both to demonstrate your confidence in the remedy and to prove that it contained no poison. This requirement added another layer of danger to your profession, as many of the substances used in royal medicine were toxic in their own right, requiring careful dosing to avoid harm while still delivering the desired therapeutic effects. The irony was not lost on you that in seeking to protect the king from poison, you regularly exposed yourself to substances that could prove fatal if mishandled. The case of King Edward's recurring headaches illustrates the complex challenges facing royal physicians and the intricate interplay between medical, political, and personal factors that influence treatment decisions. The king suffered from severe head pain that seemed to strike without warning, leaving him irritable and unable to concentrate on matters of state that required his immediate attention. The political implications were significant. A king who appeared weak or incapacitated could face challenges to his authority from ambitious nobles or foreign enemies, seeking to exploit any sign of vulnerability. Your approach to treating these headaches reflected the sophisticated medical knowledge available to royal physicians, as well as the unique pressures and resources that shaped court medicine. You began with a thorough examination of the king's lifestyle, diet, and emotional state, recognizing that royal ailments often had complex causes that went beyond simple physical symptoms. The stress of ruling a kingdom, the rich foods served at royal banquets, and the sedentary nature of court life all contributed to the king's condition in ways that required careful analysis and thoughtful intervention. The treatment you devised combined several different approaches that reflected both medical theory and practical politics. First, you prescribed dietary modifications, replacing some of the heavy meats and rich sauces that dominated royal meals with lighter fare that you believed would not contribute to the buildup of harmful humors. You also recommended increased physical activity, suggesting that the king take up hunting, an activity that would provide exercise while still maintaining royal dignity and providing opportunities for political networking. The medicinal component of the treatment involved a complex preparation made from several rare ingredients that demonstrated both your expertise and the resources available to royal medicine. 2. Powdered rhinoceros horn, obtained from traders who had traveled to distant Africa, was combined with essence of rose oil and dissolved in wine that had been infused with gold leaf. The rhinoceros horn was believed to possess powerful cooling properties that could calm the heat that rose to the head during episodes of pain, while the rose oil provided soothing aromatherapy and the gold imparted its supposed purifying virtues. But the most innovative aspect of your treatment was the use of what we might recognize as early psychological therapy. You had observed that the king's headaches often coincided with periods of political stress, and you began to incorporate calming activities into his daily routine that addressed both physical and emotional factors. These included listening to specific musical compositions that you believed had healing properties, spending time in the palace gardens where the scents of herbs and flowers could provide relief, and engaging in quiet contemplation that would help restore mental balance. The success of this multifaceted approach elevated your reputation within the court and brought you to the attention of other European monarchs who sought your services. But success in royal medicine was always precarious, as you learned when Queen Eleanor, King Edward's wife, fell seriously ill with what appeared to be a fever that refused to break despite all conventional treatments. The Queen's illness presented you with one of the most challenging cases of your career, combining medical complexity with enormous political stakes that could affect the stability of the realm. Queen Eleanor had been suffering from recurring fevers for several weeks, accompanied by weakness and a persistent cough that seemed to worsen despite your best efforts. The political implications were enormous. Queen Eleanor was not only beloved by the king, but also played a crucial role in diplomatic relations with her native Castile, making her health a matter of international importance. Her death could destabilize alliances that had taken years to construct, while her continued illness created uncertainty that foreign enemies might seek to exploit. Your treatment of the Queen's condition required all the resources at your disposal, as well as a level of creativity and risk-taking that tested the boundaries of conventional medical practice. You began with the traditional approach of bloodletting, but used techniques that were far more sophisticated than those employed by common physicians. Instead of the crude cuts made by barber-surgeons, you used delicate silver instruments to make precise incisions in veins that you had identified through careful study of anatomy texts imported from the medical schools of Salerno and Montpellier. The blood that flowed from these incisions was collected in vessels made from rock crystal, their transparency allowing you to examine the blood's color and consistency for signs of the humoral imbalances that medieval medicine believed caused disease. The Queen's blood appeared darker than normal, suggesting to your trained eye an excess of melancholy that was suppressing her natural vitality and preventing her body from fighting off the illness that had taken hold. To address this imbalance, you prepared a series of medicines designed to restore the proper proportion of humors in the Queen's body through careful manipulation of hot and cold, wet and dry qualities. One preparation combined powdered sapphires with essence of violets, creating a mixture that was believed to cool excessive heat while also providing the spiritual uplift associated with the sapphire's celestial blue color. Another remedy mixed ground pearls with rose water and honey, creating a sweet syrup that was intended to counteract the bitter quality of the melancholic humor while nourishing the body's natural healing processes. The preparation and administration of these medicines required the assistance of several specialists who formed part of the extended royal medical household. Master John the apothecary supervised the grinding and mixing of ingredients, ensuring that each substance was prepared according to precise specifications that had been developed through years of experimentation. Dame Margaret, the Queen's personal attendant, helped position the Queen for treatments and monitored her responses to each remedy, providing crucial observations that guided adjustments to the treatment plan. But despite the sophistication of your treatments and the enormous expense of the ingredients, Queen Eleanor's condition continued to deteriorate in ways that challenged every principle of medieval medical theory. Her fever persisted, her weakness increased, and she began to experience difficulty breathing that suggested the illness was affecting her lungs in ways that conventional treatments could not address. The pressure you felt was immense. Not only was the Queen's life at stake, but your own future depended on your ability to restore her health, using methods that seemed increasingly inadequate to the challenge. In desperation, you turned to treatments that pushed the boundaries of conventional medicine and reflected the extreme measures that royal physicians sometimes employed when facing impossible cases. You commissioned the creation of a special amulet containing fragments of the true cross, believing that the spiritual power of these relics might succeed where earthly medicines had failed. You also arranged for special prayers to be said in the palace chapel, with masses conducted around the clock to invoke divine intervention in the Queen's recovery. Perhaps most controversially, you decided to consult with a Jewish physician named Master Isaac, who had gained a reputation for successful treatments despite the religious prejudices of the time. Jewish doctors were often sought out by Christian nobility, because their medical traditions included knowledge that had been preserved from ancient Greek and Roman sources, combined with innovations developed in the Islamic world that were not available to Christian practitioners. The decision to consult with Master Isaac was politically risky, but the Queen's deteriorating condition left you with few alternatives. Master Isaac's examination of Queen Eleanor revealed details that had escaped your attention, demonstrating the value of different medical traditions and approaches to diagnosis. His diagnostic methods, influenced by the medical traditions of Maimonides and other Jewish scholars, included careful observation of the patient's pulse, breath, and other subtle signs that Christian medicine often overlooked. He suggested that the Queen's illness might be related to an obstruction in the flow of what he called vital spirits through her body, a concept that offered new possibilities for treatment. The treatment that Master Isaac recommended combined elements from both Christian and Jewish medical traditions, creating a therapeutic approach that was more comprehensive than either tradition could provide alone. He prepared a series of herbal remedies using plants that were familiar to you, chamomile, mint, and fennel, but combined them in proportions and methods that reflected different theoretical understanding of how diseases developed and could be cured. The collaboration required you to set aside some of your own preconceptions and consider alternative explanations for the Queen's illness. Perhaps more importantly, Master Isaac emphasized the psychological and spiritual dimensions of the Queen's illness in ways that complemented your own observations. He had observed that royal patients often suffered from ailments that were exacerbated by the emotional stresses of their position, and he recommended treatments that addressed these underlying causes, rather than just the physical symptoms. This holistic approach resonated with your own growing understanding that successful treatment often required attention to factors beyond the purely medical. Working together, you and Master Isaac developed a comprehensive treatment plan that combined the best elements of both medical traditions, while addressing the unique challenges of treating royalty. The Queen was moved to a specially prepared chamber, where the air was kept humid, with steam from herbal infusions, and where the lighting was carefully controlled to promote rest and healing. Materda was modified to include foods that both Christian and Jewish medicine considered beneficial for lung conditions, broths made from specific birds, honey preparations, and carefully selected fruits that would nourish her body while supporting her recovery. The collaboration between Christian and Jewish physicians in treating Queen Eleanor was unusual for its time, but it reflected the pragmatic approach that often characterized royal medicine when the stakes were highest. When the health of monarchs was at stake, religious and cultural prejudices were sometimes set aside in favor of accessing the best medical knowledge available, regardless of its source or the political complications it might create. This willingness to transcend conventional boundaries demonstrated both the desperation of the situation and the sophisticated understanding that effective medicine required drawing on all available wisdom. Gradually, Queen Eleanor's condition began to improve in ways that validated the collaborative approach you had developed. Whether this was due to the combined treatments, The natural course of her illness or divine intervention was impossible to determine, but her recovery was complete enough to allow her to resume her royal duties within several months. The success of this collaboration enhanced your reputation and demonstrated the benefits of combining different medical traditions, while also highlighting the unique pressures and opportunities that characterized royal medical practice. The experience of treating Queen Eleanor also highlighted the unique psychological pressures faced by royal physicians that set them apart from other medical practitioners. Unlike other doctors, who might lose patients without facing serious consequences, your failures could result in accusations of incompetence, negligence, or even treason depending on the political climate and the enemies you had made. The weight of this responsibility affected every aspect of your practice, from the selection of treatments to the way you communicated with patients and their families, creating a level of stress that few other professions could match. The constant scrutiny under which royal physicians worked extended beyond medical matters to include their personal lives and political loyalties in ways that created profound isolation, and your correspondence was monitored, your associates investigated, and your movements tracked to ensure that you posed no threat to royal security. This surveillance created an atmosphere of paranoia that separated you from normal social relationships and made your position as prestigious as it was precarious, requiring constant vigilance and political awareness that went far beyond medical expertise. The rewards of successful royal practice were substantial, but they came with obligations that extended far beyond medical care and required skills that were not taught in any medical school. You were expected to serve not only as a healer but also as a confidant, advisor, and sometimes as a diplomatic agent who could use your medical expertise to gain access to foreign courts. The knowledge you possessed about the health and physical condition of rulers made you a valuable intelligence asset, but it also made you a target for foreign agents seeking to exploit royal weaknesses for their own purposes. As your career progressed, you accumulated not only wealth and honors, but also a deep understanding of the fragile nature of power and health that few others possessed. You had seen how quickly royal favor could change, how illness could transform mighty kings into frightened patients, and how the fate of kingdoms could hang on the success or failure of medical treatments. This knowledge brought with it a peculiar form of wisdom, an understanding of human mortality that transcended social rank and political power, reminding you daily that beneath the crowns and ceremonies, rulers were as vulnerable as any other human beings. The constant exposure to the political machinations of court life also provided insights into the relationship between power and paranoia that shaped royal medicine. That you observed how the fear of poisoning influenced every aspect of royal dining, from the elaborate food tasting protocols to the use of precious substances believed to neutralize toxins. That bezoar stones, valued at 3 times their weight in gold, were regularly scraped into royal wine, while unicorn horns were waved over banquet tables in ceremonies that combined medical practice with theatrical display. The elaborate precautions taken against poisoning reflected not only the real dangers of court life, but also the psychological toll of living under constant threat. You witnessed how the fear of assassination affected royal decision-making, relationship formation, and even the simple pleasure of eating a meal without wondering whether it might be your last. This atmosphere of suspicion created a world where medical practice was inseparable from politics, and where the physician's role as healer was constantly complicated by the need to serve as protector against invisible enemies. The economic dimensions of royal medicine created their own set of challenges and opportunities that distinguished court practice from other forms of healing. The enormous sums available for royal treatments allowed for experimentation with the rarest and most expensive substances, but they also created expectations for miraculous results that conventional medicine could not deliver. The pressure to justify these expenditures through successful outcomes added another layer of stress to an already demanding profession, while the competition among physicians for royal favor could create bitter rivalries that undermined collaborative efforts. Your relationship with the guild system that governed medical practice in the broader kingdom was complex and sometimes antagonistic. As a royal physician, you operated outside many of the normal constraints that regulated other practitioners, but this freedom came at the cost of isolation from the professional community that might otherwise provide support and collaboration. The techniques and substances available to you through royal patronage often differed significantly from those used by other physicians, creating a form of medical practice that was unique to the court and difficult to replicate elsewhere. The international dimensions of royal medicine added yet another layer of complexity to your practice. Kings and queens maintained correspondence with rulers across Europe, and medical knowledge was often shared as part of diplomatic exchanges. You found yourself treating not only English royalty but also foreign dignitaries, ambassadors, and visiting nobility whose health had political implications that extended far beyond individual patient care. These international connections provided access to medical knowledge from other traditions, but they also created opportunities for espionage and manipulation that required constant vigilance. The legacy of your work as a royal physician extended beyond the immediate health of your patients to influence the development of medical practice more broadly. The resources available for royal treatment allowed for experimentation and innovation that would not have been possible in other settings, while the detailed records kept of royal health provided insights into disease patterns and treatment effectiveness that advanced medical understanding. The collaboration with physicians from other traditions, such as your work with Master Isaac, helped to break down barriers between different medical systems and contributed to the gradual evolution of more effective treatment methods. The story of Master Robert de Ashby reminds us that medieval medicine, despite its limitations, could reach extraordinary heights of sophistication when practiced at the royal level, where resources were unlimited and expectations were highest. The techniques and approaches developed for royal patients often found their way into broader medical practice, while the political pressures of court medicine pushed physicians to innovate and collaborate in ways that might not have occurred in other contexts. The integration of medical practice with politics, diplomacy, and international relations created a unique form of healing that was as much about managing power as it was about treating disease. Yet for all their privileges and resources, royal physicians remained trapped within the same fundamental limitations that constrained all medieval healers: their lack of understanding about the true causes of disease, limited knowledge of anatomy and physiology, and therapeutic approaches that were often more harmful than helpful. Their gilded instruments and precious medicines could not overcome these basic obstacles, making their successes as much a matter of luck as skill, and their failures a source of professional and personal danger that few other medical practitioners had to face. The world of royal medicine offers us a fascinating glimpse into the intersection of power, knowledge, and healing in medieval society, showing us how the pursuit of health could become entangled with politics, diplomacy, and survival in ways that created both opportunities and dangers. It demonstrates the extent to which medical practice was shaped by social context and political necessity, while also revealing the universal human desire to preserve life and health, regardless of the limitations of available knowledge and technology. In the end, the royal physician's greatest challenge was not just healing the body, but navigating the treacherous waters of court politics while carrying the weight of royal expectations and the constant threat of failure. The gilded world of royal medicine was both a pinnacle of medieval medical achievement and a demonstration of its ultimate limitations, a place where the most sophisticated treatments available could not overcome the fundamental ignorance that characterized medical practice in an age when scientific understanding was still centuries in the future. As our journey through the world of medieval medicine draws to a close, we find ourselves transported back to our own time, carrying with us the echoes of a distant age when healing was as much mystery as science, as much faith as knowledge. We have walked alongside the barber-surgeon in his blood-stained workshop, followed the plague doctor through streets filled with death, explored the monastery gardens where Hildegard cultivated both herbs and wisdom, and stood in the marble halls where royal physicians practiced their dangerous art. What emerges from these stories is not simply a catalogue of medieval ignorance or a celebration of modern progress, but something more complex and profound, a recognition of the eternal human struggle against suffering, disease, and death. The medieval healers we have encountered were not primitive or superstitious, but rather intelligent people working within the constraints of their time, using the knowledge available to them to fight battles that we continue to fight today, albeit with different weapons. The barber-surgeon, bloodletting his patients in the belief that he was restoring humoral balance, was engaged in the same fundamental quest that drives modern emergency medicine, the urgent need to intervene when life hangs in the balance. His methods were crude and often harmful, but his dedication to healing was as genuine as that of any contemporary physician. Giovanni di Ventura, our plague doctor, faced a pandemic that killed 1/3 of Europe's population with nothing but leather armor and aromatic herbs. His failure was not a personal shortcoming, but a collision with biological realities that would not be understood for another 5 centuries. Yet he continued his work, visiting the sick and dying when others fled, embodying a courage that transcends the limitations of his medical knowledge. Hildegard von Bingen showed us that wisdom could emerge from unexpected sources, that careful observation combined with intuitive insight could lead to discoveries that anticipated modern understanding by hundreds of years. Her holistic approach to healing, recognizing the connections between physical, emotional, and spiritual health, offers lessons that remain relevant today. The royal physicians, practicing their dangerous art in the shadow of thrones, remind us that healing has always been influenced by power, politics, and social expectation. Their access to rare medicines and sophisticated techniques could not overcome the fundamental limitations of medieval understanding, but their stories illustrate how the pursuit of health has always been intertwined with the pursuit of status, security, and survival. What unites all these figures is their shared humanity, their struggles with uncertainty, their confrontation with suffering, and their determination to offer help, even when their knowledge was inadequate to the challenges they faced. They practiced medicine in an age when the causes of disease were mysterious, when treatments were based on theories that we now know to be incorrect, and when success or failure often depended more on chance than skill. Yet they persevered, accumulating observations, refining techniques, and passing on their knowledge to the next generation of healers. Their failures were as important as their successes, contributing to the slow accumulation of understanding that would eventually lead to the medical revolution of the modern era. As we settle into sleep tonight, surrounded by the comforts and securities of our contemporary world, we might reflect on the debt we owe to these medieval physicians. Their struggles, their failures, and their small victories all contributed to the long journey that has brought us to our current understanding of health and disease. They remind us that medical progress is not a simple story of enlightenment replacing ignorance, but a complex human endeavor marked by courage, dedication, and the persistent refusal to abandon hope in the face of overwhelming challenges. The medieval doctor's story is ultimately our story, the story of human beings confronting the mystery of illness and death, armed with whatever knowledge and tools their age provides, driven by the fundamental desire to heal and to help. In their struggles, we see reflections of our own ongoing battles against disease, our own uncertainties about the causes and cures of suffering, and our own faith that knowledge and compassion can triumph over ignorance and despair. Rest well, knowing that the long night of medieval medicine has given way to the dawn of modern healing, but carrying with you an appreciation for those who kept the flame of hope burning through the darkest centuries of human history. Their legacy lives on in every act of healing, every moment of compassion, and every refusal to surrender in the face of suffering. Sleep peacefully and dream of gardens where herbs grow in ordered abundance, of healers who combined wisdom with wonder, and of the eternal human quest to understand and overcome the mysteries of life, death, and the fragile miracle of health.